There is a moment, buried somewhere in the 7th chapter of Crimson Desert, after what feels like a geological age of warfare against the Black Bears, who broke the Greymanes at Pyloon, killing comrades, scattering survivors, and leaving Cliff himself for dead in a river. Where it all lands. You have just unlocked Umka, the large, melancholic orc, the one who carries grief in his posture the way mountains carry snow, as permanent condition rather than temporary weather. Your companion, Cliff, gravely wounded, looks up at you from a camp cot, firelight bleeding through the timber walls behind him, the posture of a man reduced to waiting while others fight. You tell him to leave the rest to you, and then you turn, and you sprint alone into the wilderness of Pywell, and the world opens into something I recognized instantly. Living in Vancouver, you develop a specific relationship with scale. The Pacific Northwest does not ease you into its beauty. The Rockies collapse into pine forests so dark and dense, they seem to generate their own shadow. Rivers cut through stone like old arguments. The air carries the specific mineral weight of elevation and ice. Pearl Abyss, from Seoul, somehow built exactly that. The topography of Pywell has the dramatic verticality of somewhere shaped by violence, tectonic, glacial, indifferent. The mountains don't frame the world, they dominate it, the way real mountains do, the way no studio relying on concept art alone should be able to replicate, but inexplicably does here. Sprinting through that forest as Unkar, I could almost feel the specific silence of being small inside something vast and ancient, and entirely unconcerned with my existence. A feeling I had stopped expecting open-world games to produce. Which raises a question worth asking seriously. What actually makes a great open-world game in 2026? Is it the mythological density of World of Warcraft? A world so vast and so populated that it became a second life for an entire generation? Is it the emergent freedom of Skyrim? A sandbox so pliable that the player's imagination became the actual content? Is it the hyper-stylized cultural specificity of Cyberpunk 2077? A world so authored, so drenched in its own identity that merely walking through it felt like an argument? These are all legitimate answers. Pearl Abyss looked at all of them and asked a different question entirely. What if the world simply behaved like a world, where the weather was real and the darkness was actual dark, and the physics carried genuine weight, and the secrets stayed hidden until you earned them, where the minimap did not populate itself, and the icons did not appear, and nothing was managed or administered on your behalf? And what if the player's relationship with that world had to be built from scratch, earned through friction, until the gaminess fell away, and what remained was something closer to a place than a product? That is the Pearl Abyss thesis. Crimson Desert is its fullest expression. And now, having spent the last couple of weeks playing basically one game, and somehow accumulating over 200 hours, I want to share my first impressions on whether that thesis holds up. Yes, first impressions, at 200 hours. I know. Here is the thing. I've completed maybe 50% of the main story and explored perhaps 20% of the map. The rest of that time, I've just been wandering around Pywell, doing whatever felt interesting, which is apparently a lot of things. I am not even sure I can fully account for where the hours went. Somewhere between chasing an armor set I spotted in a community clip, getting completely sidetracked by an encampment I had no business attempting, and losing an entire day to what turned out to be the most humbling jumping puzzles I have ever encountered in my life, and discovering, in real time, just how bad I am at jumping puzzles. And based on what I am seeing across social media, I'm not the only one losing hours to this game in ways that are difficult to explain. Which brings me to the first and most important thing worth establishing: scale. But not in the way you might expect. Because we have had big games before. We have had enormous, sprawling, technically impressive open worlds, that somehow manage to feel smaller the longer you spent inside them. Scale without clever design, without quality, without genuine authorship, does not produce magic. In the most contradictory sense, it destroys it. A bloated open world is worse than a small one. We will come back to that. So what I want to do in each section that follows is take one dimension of this game, share my honest observations, and by the end, give you a complete enough picture to make your own call on whether Crimson Desert is worth your time and your $100 in a market full of games competing for both. Starting with perhaps the most important thing in any open-world game, the graphics. There is a reason human beings respond to visual beauty before anything else. Before the story earns your investment, before the combat clicks, before the world reveals its secrets, you have to want to be inside it. You have to look at it and feel something. Crimson Desert gets this in a way that very few games do. With a visual identity that possesses both stylistic audacity and technical substance in equal measure. Environments rendered with a fidelity that makes the world feel geologically real. Armor sets so elaborately and imaginatively crafted that you will catch yourself rotating the camera just to examine what you are wearing. Lighting that obeys physical laws rather than aesthetic convenience. Draw distances that hold extraordinary detail at ranges that should, by every reasonable benchmark, have collapsed into blur long ago. But there is one thing that has divided a lot of players: the grayness. When there is no light source, no sun, no lamp, no dramatic weather event, the game goes genuinely flat and colorless. And this is where the thesis reveals itself for the first time. A world committed to behaving like a world cannot selectively curate its own weather. Real skies are gray. Real days are ugly. Most games flinch at that. Crimson Desert does not. The gray stays because the conviction demands it. And whether you find that admirable or frustrating will tell you almost everything you need to know about whether this game is for you. Maybe it is because I live in Vancouver. 8 months of gray, and then one day the sun comes out and the entire city transforms in a way that genuinely stops you in your tracks. Something no city that is beautiful all year round could ever make you feel. Pywell does the same thing to me. Pearl Abyss had the conviction to let it be ugly sometimes. And that, I think, is what separates a living world from a pretty one. The night pushes this further than you expect. Crimson Desert's darkness is actual dark. In a rain-soaked forest at night, visibility collapses entirely. The fog moves with physical credibility, and you cannot see. And then lightning strikes. One white, explosive instant. And in that single frame, the entire scale of the world reveals itself. Rock faces and tree line and valleys dropping away beneath you, rendered in detail that LOD systems at this distance have no business achieving. And then it is dark again. What you are left with is the afterimage, and the comprehension that you are very small inside something very large. So large, in fact, that Pywell is not just one world, it is 6. Hernand, lush, medieval, impossibly alive, where every forest trail bends into something you didn't expect, and every village has its own reasons to keep you from leaving. Pylun, the frozen north, the Greymane's stolen homeland, where blizzards erase the horizon, and the passes feel less like terrain and more like the continent itself testing you. Demonis, the seat of empire, golden plains and grand fortified cities, the world's political wound dressed in its finest clothes. Delesia. And I am still not sure I fully understand what Delesia is, only that a single crazed inventor named Marnie built mechanical dragons and robotic armies and blimp warships inside a medieval continent, and that the first time you stumble into it, you genuinely stop and ask yourself whether you are still in the same game. The Crimson Desert itself. Lawless, ancient, the wound the continent is named after, and I have only just arrived at its edges. And then you look up. Above all of it float the Abyss Islands, unreachable until you find the portals, hanging in the sky like ruins from a civilization that decided the ground wasn't good enough. 200 hours in, and the sky still has answers I haven't earned. Which raises the question of what you actually do inside it. And the answer is where Pearl Abyss makes their most ambitious claim yet. The combat in this game is not merely a vehicle for story progression, it is the destination itself. Pearl Abyss spent a decade building what I would argue is the best action combat language in the genre, MMO or otherwise, inside Black Desert Online. Easy to dismiss when it was attached to a free-to-play MMO, but the mechanical achievement was real regardless. Crimson Desert is what happens when that philosophy gets to exist without compromise. No monetization pressure, no server architecture constraints, nothing diluting the vision. The result is something closer to a fighting game embedded inside an open world than anything the genre has produced before. Combo-heavy, physics-driven, expressive in a way that rewards creativity over pattern memorization. When I look at what the community is building, elemental builds with stacking AoE effects that look like something out of Path of Exile or Last Epoch, but in fully physical three-dimensional combat, the depth on offer is almost overwhelming. I personally went the opposite direction. One man, one greatsword, no spectacle I did not earn through fundamentals. Right bumper to attack, right bumper and X to vault over an enemy and hurl the blade, right bumper and A for the spinning AoE, right bumper and Y for the piercing charge. Alone, these are moves. Chained together in the middle of a burning encampment at midnight, fog rolling in, 30 enemies, it becomes something closer to the battle scene in 300 than anything a video game has made me feel before. When the combat language finally becomes fluent, you stop translating and start thinking in it. That moment is one of the most purely satisfying things this game produces. And that is only one of 3 languages available. Cliff is adaptable intelligence. Every weapon, every style, maximum flexibility. Damien is lethal precision. Rapier, pistol, spell. A glass cannon where every dodge feels like a sentence completed perfectly. Unka is overwhelming force. The two-handed axe, the arm cannon, the ground-shattering slam that ends arguments before they begin. 3 characters, 3 completely different relationships to combat. 3 games inside the same world. Black Desert Online was designed around one central idea. Combat is the point, and everything else is a reason to do more of it. Crimson Desert is that same idea in its fullest and most unrestrained expression. The story quests themselves are essentially elaborate excuses to kill hundreds of enemies. Encampment takeovers send wave after wave until the territory is yours. Sometimes it genuinely feels like they looked you in the eye and asked you to kill 1,000 enemies just to advance a single objective. And the thing is, when the combat system is this good, that is not a complaint. That is the design. However, not every dimension of Crimson Desert sustains that design with equal conviction. Pearl Abyss built a world of extraordinary philosophical coherence, and then delivered a story that, for its first 6 chapters, reads like it was authored under an entirely different set of assumptions. Side quests surface and resolve with the logic of fever dreams. Characters absorb catastrophic violence without legible emotional consequence. The connective tissue between story beats is occasionally so absent you suspect entire scenes were cut in the final weeks of production. Pearl Abyss's own CEO issued a public apology after launch. The context matters, though. Crimson Desert was produced on approximately $130 million. Concord, which nobody plays, reportedly consumed $400 million. Dragon Age Veilguard, which nobody discusses, cost comparable sums. Pearl Abyss made a deliberate allocation. Every available dollar directed toward the world, the engine, the feel of inhabiting Pywell, and the early story paid the price. If you ask me, that was the correct trade. In an open-world game, gameplay is the foundation. Story can always be expanded through future updates and DLC. And the story is not all bad. Somewhere around Chapter 7, it starts to pick up, and I find myself genuinely invested in where it is going. The tonal gap between the two halves is significant enough to feel like two different productions, and that gap is the most honest window into what Pearl Abyss actually is right now. A studio of extraordinary technical and artistic ambition that is still developing in many dimensions, without the institutional funding that the established giants take for granted. Studios that, frankly, deserve those resources far less. And yet, in the most ironic way, this outsider status turns out to be Pearl Abyss's greatest competitive advantage. During my weeks inside Pywell, one comparison kept surfacing in my mind. Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Two sprawling open-world adventures, comparable in scale and ambition. And yet, Valhalla felt bloated and exhausting by hour 50, while Crimson Desert remains genuinely magical at 200. I think it comes down to one thing: predictability. Ubisoft, as a multi-billion-dollar corporation, is fully corporatized, and it shows in every dimension of how they build games. Icons on a map, color-coded activities, content organized and distributed with the sterile efficiency of a company that has perfected a formula for scaling entertainment. After 30 hours, you already understand how the next 300 are going to go. The world becomes a checklist. The checklist becomes a chore. Crimson Desert is the opposite, and I'm not entirely sure whether that is the result of enlightened game design philosophy, chaotic development, or both. Reports of internal turbulence at Pearl Abyss are not hard to find. The development of this game was, by most accounts, genuinely difficult. And yet, in the final product, something remarkable happened. Rather than organizing everything into legible systems and predictable reward loops, Pearl Abyss packaged their world in a way where everything is hidden. Mechanics, secrets, systems, drip-fed across hundreds of hours, so that every session produces something the previous one did not. 200 hours in, I am still encountering things nobody told me were there, still surprised by what the next hour produces. That, I think, is the secret to designing a great open world in the internet age. Too predictable, and it becomes boring. Too maximalist and in your face, and it becomes overwhelming. The trick is to drip-feed the discovery. New mechanics, new systems, new surprises, arriving at a pace that sustains genuine wonder, rather than exhausting it. And this connects directly to something Pearl Abyss also appear to have grasped about how games live in culture now. Secrets cannot survive 72 hours of community attention. The moment a game releases, everything discoverable gets catalogued and indexed. Rather than fighting this, Crimson Desert produced a volume of secrets so overwhelming that encyclopedic knowledge cannot diminish the personal sensation of finding something. Watching a guide tell you where the portal is does not replicate the experience of stumbling into it yourself. The community is not breaking the design, it is amplifying it. With all that said, no design philosophy is ever 100% perfect, and Crimson Desert is no exception. Every approach comes with its own opportunity costs, and honesty requires naming them plainly. Because a game that refuses to sand away friction will, by definition, introduce friction. The die system requires physical traversal to specific locations, no centralized wardrobe, no remote access, no concession to convenience. The Greymane camp expansion is a sustained grind. Unlocking something as basic as a barber takes genuine time investment. The engine, for all its extraordinary capability, extracts a performance toll in the densest engagements. The movement physics resist intuition until the precise moment they click. and that moment is not guaranteed to arrive before your patience runs out. None of this is accidental. Every friction point has an internal logic, rooted in the same design conviction that produced the weather, the darkness, the hidden secrets. This is a game that believes earned access produces more meaningful ownership than frictionless delivery. And that philosophy, consistently applied, means the rough edges stay rough. And yet, and this is perhaps the strangest thing about Crimson Desert, the friction does not produce the hollowness that frictionless games somehow do. There is something about a world that makes you work for it, that withholds its rewards until you have genuinely earned them, that produces a quality of satisfaction no amount of streamlined convenience has ever replicated. That tension between the discomfort the design imposes and the depth it produces is, I think, the Crimson Desert experiment in open-world design stated plainly. Pearl Abyss bet that players who earn their relationship with the world will value it more than players who are administered one. 200 hours in, still in Hernand, the sky full of answers I have not earned yet. I think they were right. The modding community appears to agree. Without official tooling, every modification reverse-engineered from proprietary architecture, the community cracked the Blackspace Engine's PAZ format within days of launch and produced camera overhauls, inventory expansions, and gameplay adjustments that Pearl Abyss never sanctioned. People do not invest that labor in products. They invest it in places they have decided are worth inhabiting on better terms than the original construction allowed. The camera mod alone, repositioning the angle from its inexplicably detached default towards something approaching Red Dead Redemption 2's grounded physicality, altered my experience so fundamentally that I briefly reconsidered every hour I had played without it. And for PC players especially, this is something worth factoring into your decision. The foundation Pearl Abyss built is exceptional enough that the community will spend years improving it. That changes the value proposition significantly. This is the Skyrim argument. Skyrim persists in 2026, not through institutional maintenance, but through the sustained conviction of a community that never stopped finding new ways to inhabit what Bethesda built. The case that Crimson Desert belongs in that lineage rests not on enthusiasm, but on evidence. A community that reverse-engineered an entire proprietary engine within weeks of launch. Because the game Pearl Abyss built has already been deemed by its players as a playground worth reshaping. The feeling that the world keeps going, even when you're not looking. That every hill might conceal something meaningful. That you are, genuinely, without asterisk, free. And so, finally, we have arrived at the question this entire essay has been building toward. Is Crimson Desert, with all its conviction, all its friction, all its stubbornness, its vision of what an open-world game can be, worth your time, your money, and your experience? Here is what I believe. Culturally, as a statement about what open-world design can still achieve when a studio refuses the template entirely and pursues a singular vision with absolute conviction, yes, without qualification. This game will be discussed for years. It already is. Technically, the Blackspace Engine produces results in lighting, physics simulation, and draw distance fidelity that have no defensible business existing at this price point. Not a flawless engine, an ambitious one, which is categorically rarer and more valuable. For pure dopamine, the combat, the flow state, the moment the vocabulary clicks, and you are one man in a burning field at midnight, unable to see the ground and entirely unbothered by that. Yes, emphatically. For frustration, a world that behaves like a world will impose demands that templated, accommodating worlds have quietly stopped making. It will not explain itself. It will not apologize for its own logic. Budget accordingly. For reflection, The finest games produce thought, not merely sensation. Crimson Desert made me think seriously about what grinding means as a design philosophy, about why physical fidelity matters morally and not just aesthetically, about what it costs a studio to refuse the template entirely, and what it costs the medium when studios collectively stop trying. That is most of what I value in this art form. And for value, $100, 200 hours in, with hundreds more available, with a modding ecosystem just finding its footing, and a studio that is demonstrably, actively listening. Yes. Recommend it to your closest friend. Yes. These are just some of my observations after being genuinely obsessed with Pywell for weeks, and I'm curious whether they resonate with your own experience, or whether I missed something worth discussing. Drop it in the comments. If game reviews and weekly industry analysis are something you want more of, consider subscribing or joining as a channel member. It goes a long way. As always, thank you for watching. Until the next one, take care.